To the extent that we live our lives in a manner that is consistent with the truth in our heart, we thrive.
Welcome to the Meier Clinics podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meier Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us. Hey everyone, this is Kristen Walker, and we are doing the podcast with Dr. Lisa Day. Hello, Lisa.
Good morning.
I know it is morning where you are. We're in different time zones, and we're talking about such a great subject. We're both, what is the right word, purveyors of this diagnosis, or I'm not sure if that's the right word. Active participants, much better said. Undiagnosed ADHD in women. Before we go into what that is, I wanted to ask you, because I think it'll be great for the audience to hear, the listeners to hear, why was that topic important for you to want to talk about?
Oh, that's a good question. Oftentimes in practice, women come in with symptoms of anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, poor self-value, because they can't keep up with their day-to-day. They can't keep up with their soccer schedules. They forget major ingredients in the meal they've prepared. They go to the store, forget half the items on the list, can't keep their house organized. And they present here with, I'm a failure, I'm no good. Symptoms that develop are anxiety, depression. And when we take a deeper look, they're not experiencing just a pure mood disorder, but perhaps a mood disorder secondary to underlying ADHD, which has never been diagnosed. I mean, ADHD is diagnosed probably 3 to 4 times more in men than women. And with women, they're considered spacey, disorganized, lazy, flaky. Yeah. And so, what we're finding more and more is that while they're presenting with anxiety, depression, or have been sent to me because of hormonal imbalances or low self-esteem, really we have underlying ADHD. And when that can be addressed, we can find far greater success with both treatment and behavioral modifications. So that's my interest in it.
Well, yeah, and I love that. And I love that there's the test that you can go online and you can type in World Health Organization ADHD, and you can take the test. I think it's 18 questions. The first several are for ADD, and then the last 8 are about the ADHD part. But for anyone that doesn't know, Lisa, can you explain what those letters mean?
Sure. And currently we now have one diagnosis, and it's ADHD.
Okay.
But there are 3 different types. And so we've got the ADHD predominantly inattentive, and those kinds of folks are going to struggle with making careless mistakes, bouncing checks. They have difficulty paying attention, sustaining attention. It's difficult for them to listen and to track. They're easily distracted. They have great difficulty organizing schedules, travel, and household dynamics. And those would be predominantly inattentive. And then with the DSM-5, we have ADHD hyperactive. And these are the people who have endless energy, and they're bounding, and they're constantly interrupting and talk a lot.
It's like someone who does a podcast, right?
Absolutely. They don't sit still. They don't let other people talk. They appear selfish. They interrupt all the time. And then the third type is we see a mix. So ADHD combined, and that's where we see both inattentive and hyperactive components. So it can present any of those, and that's why it's often mixed, because it looks like a mixed bag, but then what's presented to therapy or what people struggle with are really the symptoms in their day-to-day life.
It's so interesting because when we've talked about this on the show that we do with Dr. Paul Meier, when he brought up the interrupting and the need to talk a lot, I kept groaning and going, guilty. Clearly, I've created a career out of being able to do those things because I need to do them in order to get it out. Like, that's how I get my stuff out. And if I don't get enough talking done, I start to have the spaciness and the other side of it that you're talking about. So what do you say to people where you really see that they've sort of crafted how they manage their life around this diagnosis, but they're completely unaware that that's what the underlying diagnosis is?
Well, and that's a good question, because many folks with ADHD, particularly the hyperactive part, will tell you that there's a very fun part to it. They get a lot done. They have a lot of energy. They're fun to be around. They're great problem solvers. Typically, they have huge hearts, so they're very loving and kind and giving. But where we see the difficulties, and what we believe scientifically, is that there's dopamine deficiencies in the prefrontal cortex, and that's the center of the brain that's focused on thoughtfulness and impulse control. So what we see, what presents to therapy is folks have difficulty following through with thinking about consequences for behavior. There's difficulty in choosing a good mate. In the work world, oftentimes you have difficulty dealing with customers because of impulsivity. I have a client who, was working in the customer service in retail business, and she blurted out, "What are you, some doo-doo head?" and lost her job. And I said, "Well, it's probably not appropriate to call someone a doo-doo head." And she said, "Well, I realize it's inappropriate, but the impulsivity that's behind it, they strike before they realize." And there, folks who have this will often feel sorry and feel bad about it, but have difficulty, managing that impulsivity.
So what are some of the misdiagnoses that people can get when this is really the underlying problem, but they get labeled with some other diagnoses because of it?
I think that the two most common diagnoses that are misdiagnoses are anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, and depression. And it can be a misdiagnosis, or it can be a secondary and adjunct diagnosis, because if one is losing their keys constantly or calling people doo-doo heads, or having difficulty managing their life, they begin to feel anxious. They begin to feel like failures. And so they develop a hypervigilance of fear of messing up, and they get more feedback from people around them where they're messing up, where their problems are, where they're ineffective. And so they do develop anxious symptoms. And so oftentimes they're mislabeled with a generalized anxiety disorder, when in fact they're having anxiety secondary to the ADHD. And then the other one that I see often misdiagnosed, of course, is depression. And that's secondary to feeling like they're a failure, that they can't keep up with their peers. They can't keep up with their homes. They can't keep up with their jobs. It's not uncommon to have multiple job losses, being fired, being let go. And so the self-esteem just plummets,
right.
And folks can isolate and withdraw because of, the thoughts of, I'm a failure, I'm no good. And so they present with symptoms of anxiety and depression, but they're symptoms that are secondary to the underlying ADHD rather than a major depressive episode or a generalized anxiety disorder.
Oh, that is so interesting. I mean, the amount of women that can be helped with this. So why do you think that women, I know why men would, be diagnosed with this more, but women, their tendency to not go and find this out for themselves. What do you think the psychology is around that?
Of women not looking for the diagnosis?
Well, yeah, just going with the fact that, I'm just a bad housekeeper. I'm a failure as a wife. I'm whatever, to go there instead of maybe this really is an underlying issue. To me, it seems like a lack of education that's out there, because I didn't know this stuff. And had I known this when I was a failure at housekeeping and, certain things, if this had been
given to me if I had been to a therapist that knew about this and said, hey, why don't we at least look at this and see if this is part of the problem? I would have been like, oh, light has just sprung into my life. This is wonderful. It's not me. But as a female, I didn't even think to ask these questions, and I felt kind of stigmatized about it. Like, no, it's just that you're a failure.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of factors with that. Historically, we think of ADHD as a childhood disorder, right? I think that currently we have 6.4 million kids who are diagnosed with ADHD. And I think that about 6% of them are on medication. And there's this strange unspoken belief that you outgrow it, right? That you have this condition during childhood and then it goes away. And then historically, it's diagnosed far more frequently, 3 to 4 times more in boys than in girls. And in boys, we think ADHD. In girls, we think, because they often present with the inattentive type, we think spacey, lazy, not so bright. And I think that probably carries into adulthood. So adult men, we see those characteristics and we think, oh, there's an adult ADHD. With women, I think the first line for women is, what's wrong with me? Am I having hormonal imbalances? Am I premenopausal or, menopausal, postmenopausal? Is this associated with lack of education or lack of motivation? So I think that women tend to go in more in a shameful, critical analysis, whereas with men, we think, oh, they have ADHD. Or whereas women, women tend to be more, oh, that's a character trait rather than a diagnostic entity.
That is such a good point. Exactly. A character trait, a character flaw. And that goes back to, how much we're supposed to be perfectionists as women. It makes it even difficult to say, I have this, I would think, because, oh my gosh, that means that I'm not perfect. And not that you want to be perfect all the time, just that you think that you are supposed to be. That's what society expects of you. That's what you expect of you. That's what you're told you're supposed to be. And then to go in and look at a diagnosis around it would hit on that, oh, you aren't perfect, which is hard for some of us, especially women.
It's so difficult. And a woman is more likely to think, I'm completely overwhelmed at home. I'm exhausted. I feel inadequate. I feel horrible. My esteem dives. And then emotionally they begin to feel like their lives are out of control. And so it brings them in where they're not likely to go to a psychologist or psychiatrist and say, I think I have a mental illness, or I think I have ADHD or ADD. I'm a failure. And so it's the shame, I think, is one of the things that prohibits it. And that's where we see the symptoms of anxiety and depression. And then oftentimes people will come in, or family members will come in and believe that their wife or spouse or adult daughter has bipolar disorder, because we can see incredible mood shifts with ADHD. They set out to go on a camping trip and they get there and they've left the chicken at home and the chairs are in the shed and they left the sleeping bags and they beat themselves up. But then the family's like, what's up, Mom? Where's the dinner? And husband's like, where are the chairs? And it was a simple task of packing the cooler, and a woman just moves in a shameful position.
Right. Oh boy, have I had plenty of those things happen. It's interesting when you look back at your life earlier than when you figured out the diagnosis and you go, oh man, all of those times where I felt so bad, and the reality was I have this condition. And now that I'm working with someone that understands it and can help me live with it and also medicate it properly, it actually, you can kind of go back and rewrite all those negative things that you said about yourself in the past and get some healing around it, I would think.
Well, and relationally, it shows up in an interesting way as well, because with the prefrontal cortex and what we believe is a dopamine deficiency, folks with ADHD are constantly seeking some form of stimulation. And oddly, the paradox of, okay, I can't do this, I need to work harder. We often see when someone takes that approach that I've got to work harder, be more organized. When they put that pressure on, the harder they work, the worse it gets. And so that just, further exacerbates the problem. And so we've got the harder you work, the worse it gets. We've got the impulsivity. And then what some research is showing us, which many of us don't even think about, is that with couples, so in a marital relationship, folks with ADHD can actually be conflict seeking, meaning they look for, not consciously, but they unconsciously look for conflict. They look for turmoil, because when they can stimulate the prefrontal cortex, it gives it a sense of being tuned in. And so oftentimes if I have a couple here and there's a lot of conflict, a lot of impulsive statements or comments or hurtful comments, a life of disorganization, of being overwhelmed and not being able to keep up, that's another indicator that perhaps we've got ADHD on board.
So they're looking for stimulation because of having ADHD. And so in order to get that, they're creating conflict and chaos.
Right. And so for a typical person, when we're faced with a challenge, when our prefrontal cortex is going to kick in, with an ADHD person, the opposite thing happens. It slows down. And so the lack of activity and stimulation in the prefrontal cortex leaves one craving activity, craving a way to tune in.
Oh,
and
that
so
makes
when there's
so much sense.
Yeah, and we don't think of it as practitioners, but I teach folks that I work with is that if you have a high conflict relationship, please look and rule out if there's underlying ADHD in either one of them. And it's not because they're bad people; they're looking for a way to focus in, and so it's just another way that it silently shows up, or a symptom to assess.
So okay, so let's say you have someone that figures this out and figures out that they definitely are looking for a stimulant, but they don't know that it's ADHD. What kinds of things might they do outside of chaos? What kind of substance abuse would you see if someone did go in that direction, that they would be looking for to be a stimulant for them?
You mean to self-medicate type of thing?
Yeah.
Well, definitely caffeine, because it's got the stimulant effect.
Right.
But unfortunately, what I see a lot with undiagnosed ADHD is alcohol use.
Yes.
And that is more, and I don't think that's an attempt to necessarily manage the symptoms, but to numb the pain of the consequence of the symptoms. But I've had other folks who tell me, who are ADHD hyperactive, that the only way they can stop, slow down, sit down, get their brain off, is to use substance. And oftentimes marijuana, alcohol would be the two most common. And it's their way of stopping their brain. Not that it's a functional thing. We see secondary problematic substance use and abuse there, but definitely those two show up. When folks are trying to focus in, so if they're in school or work, caffeine, unfortunately the Red Bulls, the artificial stimulants, which is about the worst thing they can take. I mean, nutritionally, what we want folks with ADHD to do is really be high amounts of good lean protein, and we want them to stay away from the manufactured or the carbohydrates, the sugars, the caffeine drinks, simply because they make the symptoms worse.
That's so fascinating, because when you're talking about medication for ADHD, it is a stimulant. But how does that stimulant make you focus if you're someone that's, I don't know, I don't understand how it works. It does work. I've been prescribed with Vyvanse, and it definitely helps me focus where I have not been able to focus before. But it doesn't do the other things that when I've self-medicated with alcohol as an example. And exactly what you said, alcohol for me was the only time at the end of the day where I could literally just shut off my brain. That was the only reason it was happening, was, please, I need a break. I need a break. And alcohol provided that break for me. So it seems odd that a stimulant would be something that I would use instead of something that's alcohol that shuts my mind down. So can you explain maybe chemically what those things mean?
Well, definitely. And usually I use my hands to do that. And so, so I would say,
picture Lisa holding up a hand.
So we have a clap. I say that the ADHD brain is irregular, and it's coming, I don't know if you can hear my hands back, it's irregular. And what a stimulant does is it helps regulate the transformation of information. So rather than being bombarded with, if you were to kind of visualize 6 different angles with 25 pieces of information coming to you at one time, we're able to tunnel them so that we're more likely to have single pieces of information coming at one time.
Hi, this is Dr. Paulmeier of the Meier Clinics. We're reminded in Jeremiah 29:11 that God has good plans for each of us, plans to give us a future and a hope. When you're going through difficult times, it's important to remember that important truth. Our Christian counseling staff at the Meier Clinics will also come alongside you with encouragement and biblically based counseling.
This message is sponsored by the Meier Clinic Foundation, a nonprofit Christian counseling ministry. The number is 1-888-7-CLINIC, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
The paradoxical effect of a stimulant with someone with an ADHD mind is that it's able to slow the input and help increase the filter of input of information coming in. Whereas without it, I don't know the exact figures, but maybe a non-ADHD mind has 100 pieces of information coming in at any given time. And I think the numbers are like 25,000 for an ADHD person. Yeah. But what we do find, and it's kind of interesting, diagnostically, is that if the individual does not have ADHD, they're going to take that stimulant and they're going to have amphetamine negative side effects. They're going to feel speedy, jittery, uncomfortable. It's not going to calm their mind. It's going to stimulate it to the point where it's uncomfortable.
Oh, so, absolutely. Like pouring gasoline on a fire. Horrible.
Yeah. And what we've also discovered, and this is a better question for Paul probably, but what we've discovered too is that the antidepressant Wellbutrin, it's not a serotonin releasing inhibitor, but it in fact works on dopamine, is my understanding. And oftentimes women will respond real well with a Wellbutrin. So we get a double, whammy with that one. We address the depressive symptoms that can be secondary to the ADHD, but because it operates on the dopamine within the brain, it is effective for the milder forms of ADHD. So oftentimes, definitely the Adderall, the Ritalin, the Concertas, the Vyvanse are the very common stimulants and are very effective in the treatment of ADHD. But we also can find at times that Wellbutrin is helpful for the milder presentations of ADHD.
Are there people that would take both Wellbutrin and something like a Vyvanse?
I have observed that, and that's going to certainly be dependent upon a thorough assessment and evaluation by a psychiatrist. And there's such individuality with dose and duration, short acting, long acting, but certainly I've seen people on both. On both. And it's what I've observed over the years with some folks, they could be responding to Ritalin for years, and then it doesn't seem to be affecting them, or the side effects are prohibitive, and they'll switch to a Vyvanse. And so really, having a good treatment team of a psychotherapist, a psychiatrist, and the client, the patient, and everybody being, very much on top of, are we getting the therapeutic effects from this medication, to reach the optimal level of functioning. But the other things that are important too, which we work on therapeutically, we're going to look at nutrition, we're going to look at exercise, sleep, screen time, and mind, body. And as I mentioned, we know that a diet high in protein and low in processed carbohydrates is essential. We have found that omega-3 fish oils are really helpful in the neurotransmitters, so with the neurochemistry of the brain. Exercise, huge. I typically recommend, and some of my clients think I'm a little crazy, but I recommend about 45 minutes of exercise 5 days a week, because I observe, when we're exercising regularly, not only does it have a healthy impact on our brain chemistry, but it consequently lowers the ADHD symptoms.
That is so fascinating too. And what's interesting is when you are someone that operates, and I say this as someone that has been diagnosed with this, so firsthand experience, when you operate at, like you said, the 25,000 pieces of information coming at you, you can also get to this place where your entire life feels like Mount Everest, and you just can't, why even try to climb it, because it's impossible. And it's very difficult to sort of sit back and go, okay, well, you can do it if you just take one step at a time up the mountain, but your brain is going, and so it's just, everything feels completely overwhelming, and you already feel like a failure because of all kinds of other things. So I can see how that would turn inward and turn into a depression. So to me, all the things you're talking about, it's that learning how to manage the behavior too. It's not just a pill, it's all these other things, and being able to talk about it openly with someone like you that would help someone figure out, okay, what do I need to do? How do I need to behave in my everyday life where I take one foot in front of the other? How do I do that in order to help me have this be a benefit instead of this be something that turns into depression or, overuse of substances, etc.?
Well, and one of the things that I always include are family members. And so with women, oftentimes there's conflict that has developed, because of all the symptoms that we've described. And so I always invite the partner in. And so, whether it's a man with ADHD or a woman with ADHD or the double whammy when both have ADHD, that's an interesting home, let me tell you. Usually what we find is an inattentive with a hyper focus, and they seem to have balance. But, one of the things that I teach is that, one who struggles with ADHD, they're hard on themselves. We're hard enough on ourselves, but then they get nothing but negative feedback all around them. Their supervisors, their banks, their spouses, their kids, their family members. And so the first thing I will teach is go easy on them. Understand that they're not doing this on purpose. I say the most important component, from a partner's position is patience. To know that they folks with ADHD respond really well to positive feedback, yes, and they respond very negatively to punishment. They're not stupid. They're not lazy. They're not intentionally cutting you off in conversations or calling you unkind words. The impulsivity can just bulldoze through their governor, if you will. And so they can say really unkind things. They don't mean to call you these bad names, but it impulsively comes out. And I teach partners that one who struggles with ADHD, they're sorry. They don't feel good about where it shows up destructively in relationships. But oftentimes they will, develop a calloused heart. They'll pull in because they're constantly screwing up. And so, with partners, we want to teach them to always come at your partner with love, to consciously on a daily basis. And I challenge, it's far seeking, but I say 10 to 1, for every one thing you want to address with your partner with ADHD that needs to be addressed, if we can give 10 positive feedbacks through the day. I appreciate your creative problem solving. Mm-hmm. You are so much fun. You have such an adventurous spirit. And then you address the impulsive spending on your Amazon Prime that's taking your budget.
Exactly. Honey, the landfill of cardboard boxes from Amazon is all really coming from our home. So maybe we should kind of talk about that.
Well, or you come home and your honey has brought home 3 not little cases. I'm talking, 4 by 4 foot by 4 foot boxes of CDs that were being discarded at the dump. And he thought there was a good idea that there could be some really good ones in there. Instead of thinking, what in the world are you doing? You take a big breath and you say, there's a lot of music in there, honey. Let's take a look. So instead of, are you kidding me? Have you done this again? So to come at them with patience, to come at them with love, to identify, their good qualities, to affirm how fun they are, how adventurous they are, is so important in the partner dynamic.
So true. I've had some people that, I've had to have my patience with that will be very, very rude, even on a business call, extremely rude and pushy, and then say, well, I just tell it like it is. And my response in the past has been, okay, well, that's not okay. That's a story that you're telling yourself to make it okay for you to hurt people's feelings. And that's just not okay. Now that I've learned, a lot of this, thank goodness, Dr. Paul Meier comes on our show every week. We've learned so many things from him and then learned things from you. Now I'm way more patient about it. Like, there could be an underlying thing going on here. Maybe they just are so used to everyone attacking them all the time and they're just prepared to be always in defense mode. And so I can say something like, well, I understand that you're telling it like it is, but maybe, just take it down if you, not just because you're telling it like it is, does in fact hurt some people's feelings.
Oh, Absolutely. We want to understand that I teach that ADHD is an understanding, not an excuse. So, whether we're the person struggling with it, we can't say, oh, well, I called you, the dork, or
the doo-doo head.
Or the doo-doo. And it's not okay, and we don't tolerate it. I mean, I remember at one time in my youngest daughter struggles significantly with ADHD, and a short person, a midget, came into a room, and when she was a young girl, it was, look, Mama, there's a very short woman right there, and it was right there, and so that was the first indication that I started teaching that it's I wouldn't say, okay, that's just fine. We want to learn that I am impulsive. I do impulsively say things, and I don't intend to be unkind or rude or disrespectful, but it's not an excuse. And so it's a thin line. And so in one of, in the work that we do with ADHD is understanding that I tend to be impulsive. So I teach, when in doubt, zip it up. And that's our lips. When in doubt, zip it up, and then think through it. Then we're going to think through what am I feeling? What does it relate to? And do I need to share that at all? So when in doubt, zip it up. Because then it's less damage. It's damage control, right?
Right.
But
right.
But yeah.
Oh, that's so,
and the other
so fascinating.
The other thing, I don't know if you've struggled or found this in your own life, Kristen, is that I talked about nutrition is so important. Exercise is so important. Sleep. It's difficult to sleep when you are on a stimulant. Stimulants make it more difficult to fall asleep, and yet sleep deprivation absolutely going to increase the. Yeah. And then what we're seeing is screen time. And there's a number of different researches going on right now on the effect of screen time on the amygdala. And, of course, we know the amygdala is associated with cortisol, but we're seeing with increased screen time is associated with increased severity of ADHD symptoms.
Yes.
So that's something, we want to be cautious of as well.
Absolutely. And also when your hand starts to hurt chronically, it means you're using your phone and your mouse way too much, so you need to stop and go take a walk.
Yes. Well, and that's a great coping mechanism is taking a walk and realizing, whether we struggle with ADHD or we live with someone with ADHD, we want to give them that space. We want to give them the grace and space when they say, I need to go for a walk. Right. And not insist that they finish the conversation, not insist that we get to the bottom of it. We want to honor that is a self-management skill. I need to take a walk. I need to get outside. I need to get in nature. I need to get some exercise.
How wonderful to look at this in a positive way, because it's so true. It hit me right in the heart, you saying, they don't mean to be this way, and the self-punishment that we give ourselves. I have just put myself on the rack so many times in my life for my behavior, and going to some therapeutic places where they were all about kind of this tough love stuff. I mean, I've been through a lot, so I can, obviously I can handle a lot. I'm still here. I'm a survivor and a thriver, but that tough love did not work for me. I'm sorry, but positive reinforcement is what works for me. And I can see where with this, the self-recrimination that comes with ADHD, especially for a female, getting tough love therapy just seems really like that would do some serious hardcore damage,
There's so much room for shame, from family members and spouses. The comment, what were you thinking when you brought all those CDs home? Instead of coming alongside and say, help me understand, what are your thoughts here?
Right.
Or when one is, impulsive or frustrated and feeling like pulling out their hair because they can't get that one step forward, to come alongside. And instead of saying, what's wrong with you? Can't you just get your act together? It's, how can I help? How can I be here? How can I help? And these are learned tactics, just like any other coping mechanisms, because it's difficult. Parents will tell you raising, children with ADHD, it's not normal. But ADHD is not normal. Right. But a phrase that I came across this past year that I really like, instead of focusing on you're not normal, is the phrase neurotypical. So, the majority of folks are neurotypical. But when we have ADHD, we're not neurotypical. And so we need to accommodate accordingly.
We hear that word. We do so many interviews about autism, and so we know that word well, neurotypical, and that's interesting. That adds a whole new perspective on it. And so, as we wind down this show, let's talk about, just so that people see, there are positive things to having ADHD. So can you talk about some of that for the listeners that are like, yeah, this is all great and I appreciate it, and can you say something nice? I need some of that positive reinforcement.
Oh my goodness. There are and, you'll assess folks with it, and I would have to say that the majority of folks who I know who have ADHD like the unmedicated part, as long as they're not trying to work or organize their home, because they're super positive. They have tremendous energy of 4 women. They get tons of things done. They are highly creative. They're excellent problem solvers, because folks with ADHD, they think outside the box, particularly hyperactive ones. They think way outside the box. They're known to do random acts of kindness simply because they have huge, generous hearts. Remember, anything they do quite well. And with ADHD, we see brilliant minds, creative minds. We see that they're not restrained socially, which can be a negative, but it also can be a positive. They can be quite funny. I mean, the funniest people you'll know oftentimes are ADHD, and their sense of humor, their wit, they're fun people.
Their charm, they can be extremely charming. And just ability to connect with other people because of that huge heart like you're talking about. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, absolutely. They may go into the hardware store trying to get a bag of screws and then get engaged in a conversation and not come out to 2 hours later. But that conversation sure is going to be good and interesting and bright. And I see a lot of, the photographic memory, they don't miss a stitch. No. So when they are interested in what they're focused on, the ability to share information and facts and history and data and stories, it's incredible. So there's a huge upside to it. Where the downside to it is in the daily tasks, getting the laundry done, getting bills done, following through with calls and dental appointments or vet appointments. It's the daily, mundane, somewhat boring parts of life that set them up for failure. So there's a huge upside. They're fun people, brilliant people oftentimes. Right,
exactly. Because what is fun about doing the laundry? You know what I mean? I mean, come on.
Yeah, not much.
It does need to be done.
Mundane tasks are not the delight of someone struggling with ADHD, that's for sure.
Going to Target every week to buy new underwear just because you can't get the laundry done is not exactly a good way to spend money or your time.
Phones these days are quite expensive, $800 to $1,000, and yes, losing phones is a common occurrence with ADHD, and so we're grateful for the phone trackers and for phone insurance. These are practical. We're grateful for automatic coffee pots that turn off automatically after 2 hours. There's lots of accommodations that we don't realize are very helpful for folks with ADHD, but there's definitely upsides. Definitely upsides.
Well, Dr. Lisa Day, thank you so much for coming back and talking about this all-important subject. I love that we've focused on women here, and I'm so enjoying having these chats with you when we get to have them, and I know we have many more coming up. So can you give our listening family a little highlight on a couple of the other things that you're going to talk about on future shows?
Oh, this is where my ADHD comes out. I want to talk about everything. All at once.
Perfect co-host. So do I.
Yeah, some ideas that I teach a lot that I think would be fun to talk about, and I have names for them, and I would say one would be called "We Can't Truthfully Say Yes Until We Can Comfortably Say No," and that would be based on our scripture of "The truth shall set you free." But oftentimes, many of us struggle with being able to say no for fear of rejection, abandonment, hurting people's feelings. So we can't truthfully say yes until we can comfortably say no. Another one that I want to look at is living with folks with mental illness, and we touched upon it briefly here today. And it's being able to differentiate unwilling versus unable and how we support other people. Determining, is this something that this person is unable to do, or is this something that they're unwilling to do? And we set them up for shame or guilt, because we have expectations of them that they're not able to do. The third show I'd like to have in mind is, how can I be me without losing you. And that would be something more focused on boundaries.
That's a good one.
Being able to embrace the truth of my character and to be able to bring it into relationship without losing you. So how can I be me without losing you?
Oh, I love
Those
it.
are some ideas.
I love it, love it, love it. Listeners, look at what we have to look forward to. This is awesome. Dr. Lisa Day, thank you again.
Thank you, Kristen.
And thank you to our listening family.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meier Clinics, please visit our website at meierclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, MHNRnetwork.com.